everyone is doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm coming to you from Dojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look at Canada's role abroad, weekly update analysis of developments in Canadian foreign policy going on for about 120 or so weeks. The first thing I wanted to mention just quickly is the Couche-Tard, the Montreal-based dépanneur convenience store. It's put in a bid, an unsolicited bid to purchase 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven, which is actually a Japanese company. It's put in like I think it was $31 billion US bid. There's lots and lots of attention on this issue in the business press over the past week or so. I think it was on the front page of the Financial Times. And the story was 7-Eleven set stage for M&A upheaval in Japan, merger and acquisition. And so apparently the Canadian company is taking advantage of some change in Japanese legislation that facilitates foreign companies buying up Japanese firms, facilitates, I guess, unsolicited purchases. Anyways, the point being, this would be the biggest, if this goes through, they would have 100,000 stores around the world. Already, Couche-Tard is this really massive multinational, big operations in Mexico and Norway, many in the States, many countries in the world. And 7-Eleven is actually the bigger of the two. Apparently, Couche-Tard is actually worth more than 7-Eleven, bigger of the two. But it just speaks to sort of Canadian capital. Canadian capital is a force, not just in mining, not just in engineering, not just in private security, banking globally, but in this case, in the, I don't know, call it convenience, or we call it dépanneur here in Montreal. Today, the Canadian government announced they were going to bring in 100% tariffs on Chinese electronic vehicles and other fairly significant tariffs on Chinese items. And this is basically just following the US. And it was announced today, apparently. And this is, I don't actually have a problem with protectionist building up of national industry. I think that's totally fine and often a good way, better than the alternative of multinational corporate power, government, intervening in the economy to prioritize different industry for whatever reason, be it ecological, be it social, be it broader capitalist kind of reasons, functioning economy reasons. But the whole China thing, it also dovetails, of course, with the bigger geopolitical competition, which is, I think, a very dangerous dynamic. So Melanie Joly was in South Africa and I believe one of the West African countries this week, maybe more than one. I didn't really get that much media attention. The South Africa did a bit because the Globe correspondent, Jeffrey York, is based in South Africa. So he had a couple stories about the visit. And he also talked about a story or two, maybe, about Canada's upcoming Africa strategy. And I always find these things like really kind of bizarre, these government strategy papers. They usually sort of say almost nothing of real substance, but they make a big kerfuffle about it. And internally, within the sort of global affairs world, what's happened here is Africa has been downgraded, prioritized, and this strategy, which initially had a kind of was a bit more of a broader thing, it's been downgraded in what they actually call it. I'm not sure what they're just calling it a strategy paper. And initially it was, I forget the exact language, because like when they did the Asia Pacific, that was kind of the higher end of the diplomatic import that was put into it, and the Africa policy has been downgraded. There's a piece in today's Hill Times, a letter that I was sent by email, and I saw it in the paper, and it's from like a development worker sort of saying, oh, it's too late, we're too late, we haven't prioritized Africa. And I'm always like, the idea that that's the parameters of the debate is between the people who are saying we need more interest in Africa, more involvement, and that we're just not doing enough aid, versus the sort of the more of the perspective I would come from, which is just get out, let Africans figure things out themselves. That, of course, is not part of a discussion that appears in the Hill Times or anywhere around the sort of mainstream discussion. And so it's basically this aid worker saying we're not putting enough aid resources into it. Well, a couple of days ago, the largest diamond was found in Botswana in more than a century. So, but a fair bit of media attention about this big, huge diamond found. And of course, it was found by a Canadian company. And I don't know the exact relationship, the royalty rates and the taxes this Canadian company is paying in Botswana, but I basically guarantee you that this is a highly exploitative extraction process, mineral mining process. And so the whole business of like Canada being like, we're too late, we're not engaged in the continent, just ignores, of course, this huge extraction that takes place by particularly Canadian mining companies, but not solely, but particularly Canadian mining companies across the continent, where they are the dominant player in most countries outside of South Africa. And they, to varying degrees, loot the continent of billions of dollars every year. And they do that at a very official level. And then they also do it at a bit more of an unofficial level, where if you look at Barrick Gold, they have a whole slew of offices in tax havens, and they basically transfer price, which means they figure out different tax mechanisms to say that their costs appear in these low in the high tax jurisdictions, and then they transfer their the profits to the low tax jurisdictions, and they basically, on top of having good deals in their extraction process, they steal billions of dollars more in this through transfer pricing of basically screwing these governments over on paying royalty rates and taxes. And there's tons of documentation of this, and the continent loses huge sums every year by different sort of either clearly illicit or sort of gray area kind of taxation maneuvers. And so this gets lost in the whole question of Canada engaging more in the continent. The primary thing Canada does on the continent is advance the interests of Canadian mining companies. That's what the diplomatic apparatus, that's even a big part of what the aid apparatus is doing in different African countries. And whether there's a new strategy paper or not, whether there's an added $1 billion of aid funding that goes to different projects across the continent, there will still be more profits that Canadian companies are extracting from the continent than even the most generous definition of the aid that Canada is sending into the continent, and even if that's doubled, let's say. On another thing on Africa, Libya, there was a story in the New York Times about the Libyan central bank, and basically how the Libyan central bank has been kind of operating with a certain degree of agreement between the forces that control the east and the west of the country, and they've sort of been able to kind of both get their people paid by the central bank, and the central bank has relations to international banks and oil revenue and all that. But now that's sort of collapsed, and the fighting. There's basically the head of the central bank was fired by the one faction. The other faction says he's still the head of some, and so it looks like the central bank may even sort of collapse in its functioning. But the most important point from us is just this. This is now 13 years later, and Libya is still a warring mess. This is 13 years after the NATO invasion, and there's almost no attention in the Canadian media about the roots of this social breakdown in the country. Venezuela, John Iveson, National Post, complaining that Canada didn't join 10 US and Latin American countries rejecting the Venezuelan Supreme Court's rubber stamping of Maduro's fraudulent election win. But in fact, then they do. Global Affairs put out a statement, a Twitter post. Yesterday's ruling made by Nicolas Maduro's Supreme Tribunal of Justice that Maduro won the July 20 elections are not credible in view of the clear preference expressed by the people of Venezuela based on the available evidence. Canada calls on the Venezuelan authorities to respect democracy and human rights and to begin the transition process in recognition of the true results of the election. Those true results now, the Canadian government's clearly claiming they have information that we don't have, that the Electoral Council, the Supreme Court, it is possible, it always is possible that all the institutions of Venezuela are in cahoots against election results or democracy, but I would say that the proof that's out there on that is very much lacking. The Electoral Council apparently still has about a couple days, according to the law, to publish the full results, and the Supreme Court has called on the Electoral Council to do that. But my understanding, the Supreme Court got access to all the documents. So we'll see here where that goes. The Washington Post had a front page piece in Sunday's paper saying Putin is passive as red lines fall. And there's this whole rhetoric, Zelensky's obviously pushing it very hard, that Putin's just bluffing with the red lines. We've invaded Russia. We've been, controlling it for, I guess it's 3 weeks now. And it's all bluff. Like, we should just be able to bomb everything in Russia and know where he's kind of lying. And the Washington Post is sort of picking up that and running with that. That, of course, I think is a very dangerous type of thinking, where this all goes. Now, Russia seems quite clearly on the cusp of basically taking complete control of the Donbass and making some pretty substantive gains. It seems like Ukrainian forces are not really moving anymore in the bits of Russia that they've taken control of, which are, I think everyone agrees, of almost no significant value. Obviously, there are some villages and I think a couple towns that people have been displaced. There's 75, 100,000 Russians that have been displaced, but it doesn't seem like that it sort of means much strategically. It might be a little bit embarrassing for the Russian government, but it's not necessarily going to lead anything for Ukraine to have any gain from a military standpoint in the war. Now, there's a couple. I talked about the Adam Zivo story, the National Post columnist who claimed that he organized this whole sting when he was in Ukraine with the Ukrainian. He bumped into some guy at a mall. The guy was speaking English, and therefore he thought the guy seemed odd. He thought maybe the guy was trying to entrap him, or was an agent of Russia, or I think he thought it was a Chinese agent, Chinese spy or something. All very, very weird. And so he then organizes this dinner where he has Ukrainian spies that he meets the guy and has Ukrainian spies like overseeing the dinner. And so Press Progress has a pretty good story that delves into this, and they interview him, Zivo, and Zivo just sort of defends it all. And then they interview obviously these journalist, journalism school professors saying this is, of course, very questionable media ethics kind of affair. And he basically, Zivo has not backed down. He in the interview he doubles down. He basically, I reach out to the intelligence agency of the Ukrainian government. Yes, I've written more than 80 articles on Ukraine in this period, but so what? That doesn't matter. I have these relations to the Ukrainian intelligence. Now, Dmitry, there's a Press Progress artist. Dmitry Laskaris has an interview on RT that I saw on this, where he goes into about how Zivo interviews him, and they have this whole thing, and Zivo kind of smears Dmitry after Dmitry did a visit to Russia, and how Zivo never mentioned to him that he's sort of tied in with the intelligence apparatus. Now, there's a couple of things. Obviously, this is dubious kind of journalist ethics. This isn't actually that surprising, right? If you go, and in my propaganda system, I go into a whole bunch of this. If you go, and I'm doing a story on this, much too slow for my liking, but I go back into some of these stories. There's all these examples of journalists, prominent Canadian correspondents, working with the U.S. military in Vietnam and being open about how they wanted to basically embed with U.S. forces in Vietnam, and then they'd give them all kinds of, the U.S. forces would tell them all that was happening, and they consider this much bit more reliable information. Like really kind of hilarious things when you look at it through a historical lens. But this is what these Canadian journalists, other examples of Canadian journalists, working with the Canadian military, being flown, the Congo mission in the early 1960s, they're flown in Canadian military aircraft, and they're completely tied into the military. They're basically just an arm of the Canadian military while part of foreign missions. Somalia in the early 90s, Canadian apparently during Afghanistan war, Canadian military paid for some journalists, probably not from major publications, but paid for their visits to Afghanistan. Obviously, we know about the whole embedding program on Canadian military bases. So the idea that it's not a surprise that Canadian, mainstream or corporate media journalists are working closely with intelligence or military officials. This is not a surprise. It's part of how the whole game functions, and it's part of why the media is so biased on international affairs, even more so than on domestic issues, or substantially more so than on domestic issues, where they already are very biased in favor of power. It's part of the whole story. So we shouldn't be that surprised about it. The fact that he's so open about it and kind of boasts about it in 2024, I think that is a little bit surprising. In a kind of somewhat similar vein, Canada Files has a kind of funny story about Marcus Kolga and the Canadian disinformation world, the Canadian government's Protecting Democracy Unit, funded by Global Affairs Canada, where they do this whole disinformation expert video, where somehow they claim that Lenin was a source of disinformation, was kind of like the beginner of disinformation in the 1940s. But of course, Lenin died 2 decades before that period, and so Aidan Jonah has a kind of funny piece in the Canada Files, kind of mocking the Canada's disinformation world about Lenin rising from the dead. And this is just one example, but that whole disinformation world is like full of course, disinformation. NATO had nothing to do with the invasion in Ukraine. On Palestine and on the horrors, it's wild. They seem to just get worse. Today, Al Jazeera's got a bunch on this. UN officials saying they're basically halting aid because they can't operate essentially. And so they got all these like polio vaccines. Apparently, they've now the vaccines have started coming, but they basically can't operate. So their ability to actually administer the vaccines is being sabotaged. Obviously, also with regards to food, there's continues to be hundreds of Palestinians killed in Gaza over the last week. Now there was a bit of a Hezbollah response to the assassination of their top military official back at the end of January, I guess yesterday or maybe 36 hours ago or so. And Israel, of course, is sort of denying everything. Hezbollah is saying they did. I think they hit a Israeli naval vessel, and they're saying they hit a base not that far from Tel Aviv. It seems like a fairly calibrated response. There's no Israeli civilians killed, so that I think lessens the dynamic of Israel having a justification to ramp up. Jolie essentially, basically took Israel's side. She quickly had a meeting, a phone call with Israel's foreign minister, and she said, Canada reiterated Canada's support for Israel's security, including against Hezbollah, a listed terrorist organization. So she, quickly did the diplomatic kind of, we're backing Israel, we support Israel, and that's unfortunate, but not of course surprising. Now a couple of days before that, well, actually during her visit in South Africa, in the Globe piece, the South Africans are they raised, apparently in the meeting, they say they raised the ICJ, International Court of Justice ruling for Canada to basically press Israel, or to act to ensure Israel stops, follows the ruling about its violence and halting of its massacres and blocking of aid and all that into Gaza. And Jolie kind of said, yeah, we are pushing Israel to accept the emergency orders, of course, doing nothing of it, just sort of stating that we're pushing. But then she basically flipped it back the other way on South Africa, saying that South Africa should be using its connections to Iran and Hamas to push for a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the idea that South Africa has more responsible for Iran or Hamas's doings than Canada is for Israel's is completely ludicrous, right? South Africa is not providing weapons to Iran or Hamas. South Africa is not having all these charities providing all this money, on and on and on. We've been through it in different sessions, but this is sort of the kind of diplomatic game that Melanie Jolie is doing. Also, in that interview, there's a quick line where the Globe says that Jolie denies the Canadian new arms export. Nothing more than that. I don't know what she said exactly. That's all that's in the Globe. Now, of course, about a week, 10 days ago, story broke in the Maple that there was a big $83 million U.S. contracted order from Montreal facility of General Dynamics Ordnance here in Montreal, 50,000 mortars to supply Israel. And the Canadian government refused to respond on this question for more than 5 days. And then they finally put out a statement saying, we're not going to speculate on a U.S. I got the exact wording here. Maybe we'll get the exact wording. We will not speculate on a possible foreign military sale by the United States. Okay, well, that foreign military sale, in the release for it, says explicitly that the principal contractor is, quote, located in Quebec, Canada. And last I looked, Quebec, Canada is under federal government jurisdiction. But here you have the government just openly saying the US government can contract whatever it wants from Canadian companies to provide Israel, and that has nothing to do with us. And that's a pretty remarkable kind of a reveal. And of course, we knew this was going on, but this is through the Defense Production Sharing Arrangement going back to 56, where basically Canadian companies are treated as U.S. companies. That's how we don't even know that more than half Canadian weapons sales go to the U.S. We don't know basically anything about them that the U.S. doesn't announce, or that some other company or that aren't announced in some other way. They're not even tracked. So what the Global Affairs is saying is, both outrageous and, of course, true. And that gets us to this question of the Palestine world. And, I would say it's been way too narrow. Like, in the demonstrations, there's obviously, there's a chant, who is the revolution? We are the revolution, and stuff like that. And there's a kind of like, there's a play towards, we need to upend the system. The system is who's responsible for supporting this genocide and whatnot, which is good. But really concretely, the Palestine solidarity movement needs to be targeting this is within the parameters of still accepting imperialism and still accepting capitalism, but would be quite radical in the here and now, which is abrogate the defense production. If you're saying the U.S. can just contract as many weapons to Israel from Canadian companies, well, of course, we just get rid of the defense production sharing arrangement. That should not exist. There is no reason that should exist. That's an immoral thing. We don't need it. It should be on the agenda. It's not really been on the agenda of any real political movement. Palestine World should put it on the agenda. Same thing with NORAD, right? NORAD provides all kinds of support for U.S. and almost certainly is giving all kinds of intelligence support for Israel. NORAD historically in 91, Iraq War, when they launched Scud missiles at Israel, NORAD helped Israel knock them down. During the Yom Kippur 1973 war, they went on high alert as a message to basically pressure Soviets not to back Egypt. So NORAD is, assisting Israel. Same thing with the Communications Security Establishment and the Five Eyes intelligence apparatus, right? That Canada's part of, with New Zealand, UK, Britain, Australia, right? They're supporting Israel. We know that Edward Snowden. We knew that before Edward Snowden, but he gave some more detail about how the Five Eyes supports Israel. Well, Palestine World needs to start talking about, get rid of the end the Five Eyes, right? That we should pull out of the Five Eyes. Same thing with NATO. Israel is a strategic partner, one of the five initial in 86 or 87 or something like that. What they call them major non-NATO allies. Israel is one of the five. Israel's, through the NATO exercise in Cold Lake, Alberta, has the Israeli pilots have trained in some of those. So we need to be pushing, I think, and I would include myself in this. We need to be pushing in, more of Palestine solidarity world, a bit more of a holistic critique of Canadian foreign policy. And this is not, you could eliminate NATO, Canada's role in NATO, you could eliminate NORAD, you could eliminate the Five Eyes, and still have imperialism and still have capitalism. So it's not radical in the here and now of Canadian foreign policy. It would be a pretty monumental shift. But it's this is some of the stuff we need to start pushing and raising in some of our Palestine related work. Couple little bits. There was a Maple story about Global News refusing to air two different interviews critical of Israel, and then the anchor that did the interviews, Farah Nassar, then left the network. One of the interviews was with Mandela's son. There's a CIJA, another, I think probably mentioned this previously. CIJA is announcing another. They're taking their law. They're suing the federal government for restarting funding to the UN Refugee Agency for Palestinians, UNRWA. There's a post of this what they're calling community-based surveillance team in Toronto. So Melissa Lantsman, the deputy conservative leader, it's called the Magen Haret Canada. Magen Haret has a sort of fascist background, and it's basically street thugs, I guess, in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood in Toronto. And Melissa Lantsman is like, attends, there's a photo of them with these big bulky guys, her, and basically, is there for the launch of this sort of fascist street thug kind of group. The Tristan Hopper, who's a National Post columnist, had a whole bunch of posts on X that are just delusional, just crazy. This is just where the craziness of the National Post is on Palestine. He has this one, says, "Me and my foreskin are going to break the bank at PAGS this week. I've resolved that this is what I'll say if I see any watermelon zombies. I've discussed with my lawyers, and this is preferable to running them down with my car like I wanted." I'm not exactly sure what he's trying to say in all this, but essentially he's threatening to run down with his car Palestine, or watermelon zombies, as he calls them. Okay, so then Hopper, in another post, he goes on, this is unrelated post, is the quote, pro-Palestine cause is the worst hate movement in our history, bar none. Except the other hate movements generally weren't composed of massive wusses with university jobs who tried to get journalists canceled if they said something mean about their dumb slogans. And then he's quoting himself. He says, to review, 10 months of masked mobs baying for terrorism and a second Holocaust on the streets of Canada. And the real outrage is that Doug Ford referred to a rabid anti-Semite as a disgusting human being. Okay, this is just, I mean, the vulgarness of the over-the-top. Okay, so what the disgusting human being is Fred Hahn, the head of CUPE Ontario. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, called the head of CUPE Ontario a disgusting human being. Okay, and this is because he stood up for Palestinian rights. And Warren Kinsella, a Toronto Sun columnist on Twitter, says, I wish to issue an important correction about Doug Ford calling Fred Hahn, quote, a disgusting human being. I don't think Hahn is a human being. The rest of it is accurate. Ha ha ha. I mean, this is where the columnists in the main, daily papers are, this is where they're at, joking about not just a disgusting human being is not a human being, the head of CUPE Ontario. And why? Okay, so the ostensible reason is this recent video that Fred Hahn posted, I think, on Facebook. And some of you may have seen it. It's a video released during the Olympics of somebody with a Israeli flag, or the colors, Star of David, but it's clearly Israel. It's the Olympics on his, just 2 seconds. Sorry, that was just my my son. Okay, so it's a video that he posted of this Israeli diver jumping in the water and it's bombing Gaza. And I mean, there's nothing anti-Semitic about the video. Like they're trying to frame it like it's the Star of David, and it's just, oh, this is a Jewish person and Jewish people killing. It's the Olympics. There's national flags. That's what, we didn't choose the Israeli flag having the Star of David on it. That's on Israel. That's on Zionist forces for choosing that. I mean, what do you do? That's what else do you do to demarcate Israel than employ their flag, which includes the Star of David? Anyways, unfortunately, Fred Hahn deleted it and apologized because he got, smoked so much for it. There's no reason to do that. It's totally legit. It's absolutely correct. There's no reason why Israel should have been part of the Olympics. You're going to ban Russia, but Israel is going to be part of the Olympics. I mean, it's total double standard. That's the point of the video. People can check it out. The Ontario Labour Minister did this whole thing where he attacked Fred Hahn, did a social media clip where he berated Fred Hahn. And then, of course, as you know, then not out long after, the Premier called him a disgusting human being. And now in this mix, very unfortunately, the CUPE National joined in on this smear campaign, and they called for Fred Hahn to be taken off the CUPE National Board, and he was just reelected by quite a large margin. My understanding, I don't know the exact results, but multiple people who more attuned to CUPE politics, who were probably at the convention, stated it was quite a large margin. So he was just reelected, I think, 3 months ago. And they just gone completely, the whole media, Israel lobby attack, and the CUPE National Board joined it. Now, after a real deluge of letters, now I hate to burst some people's bubble. There's a action alert floating around online, and it says it's like 170, 180,000 letters. I don't think that's correct, because I think it's going to about 20 different people. So I think it's actually a 10th, or sorry, a 20th of that. So I think it's more towards like 9,000 people who've sent emails, and not the 180,000. But 9,000 people sending emails to the CUPE Ontario or CUPE National Board on the issue is very significant in and of itself. They then backed away. They kind of softened. They said, well, we're not, after Doug Ford attacked Fred Hahn, we don't take direction from Doug Ford, and we denounced Doug Ford, and we're not trying to, Fred Hahn has a good history of defending the working class. I forget exactly, sort of, they backed away from their outrageous resolution calling on him to resign from CUPE National. Not that he should, they don't have any power over it for CUPE Ontario leadership, but that he should leave the board of CUPE National, which I think he was also elected for. I think there's 2 elections for the CUPE head of CUPE Ontario, and then for that position, but I'm not certain about that. Now this is not actually the first time. CUPE National has done this a couple times. So back in 2006 or 7, I think it was 2006, when CUPE Ontario, the convention passed the BDS resolution, CUPE National put out a statement saying, we will not be issuing a call to our local unions across Canada to boycott Israel. So distancing themselves from CUPE Ontario's resolution. No need to do that. And then in 2009, when Sid Ryan called for boycotting of Israeli academics or Israeli academic institutions, CUPE National also, the story was Ryan rebuked by national CUPE head. So the head of CUPE National criticized the then head of CUPE Ontario. So this is not the first time that CUPE National has done this dubious sort of selling out Palestinians. I'm of the opinion, I think this is, Fred Hahn's not going anywhere. He's basically said, no, this is great. It's totally freaking out the pro-Israel. CIJA then launched a couple of days ago, after this got going, launched a whole action alert demanding Fred Hahn be removed. I don't know, like how, what their mechanism. He's saying, I was just elected, I'm not leaving, screw you. But they're really panicked because they operate based upon crushing. And if someone is not crushed after they try all that, it's really embarrassing. It's a problem for them, because their power is really based upon this perception that you just, once the onslaught comes, you have to just sort of cave. And Fred Hahn would be, alongside maybe Sarah Jama, would be kind of like the highest profile people that they've really launched their machine at. And he's not going anywhere. So I think it's a real big blow, actually, to the Israel lobby. I mean, it's going to be a big blow to CUPE, Fred Hahn. I think CUPE National should really be, the person who launched it, apparently this is the BC representative, she should resign. Who launched the resolution against Fred Hahn, she should resign. The whole board should apologize to the Palestine Solidarity Movement Canada, and they should, quite frankly, they should be groveling for forgiveness to Palestinians in Gaza, to, amidst the horrors, to smear Palestine Solidarity. But IJV, there's just a letter today, a bunch of Arab organizations condemning what CUPE National has done. Quite a few different, Labor for Palestine, again, is the one that launched the petition, very successful petition. Lots of messages of support for Fred Hahn at the Pride parade in Ottawa yesterday. And that gets to the second thing of this, this Pride, what happened with Capital Pride in Ottawa, I think is just maybe one of the clearer examples of how the genocide lobby, the apartheid lobby, they have the power on high.
right? They have the power, they have the media, they can mobilize the media, they can get these different institutions to pull out the mayor, the right wing, who was already, anti-pride mayor, who was just looking for his excuse to drop out of pride. They got the police to cut the number, so the pride parade was cut in half in its how far it went, because the police last minute withdrew their a bunch of their the agents they'd committed to like 6 months earlier. They got some, I think, the bank. They got the hospitals, the Ottawa District School Board to pull out. They got a whole bunch of these sort of institutions. But Pride was a huge success, right? It was a huge success. So they can pull it off on high and make a big media kerfuffle about it, but in practice they don't. People aren't with them, right? And certainly, like, people who might go to Pride overwhelmingly are standing with Palestinians, overwhelmingly against genocide. And even if they're kind of like indifferent or ambivalent about the issue, like the idea that they're going, that they're going to like sabotage Pride Parade for what was really an innocuous statement. I mean, the effort, the emboldenedness, and the disconnected from reality of these Israel lobby people is I think really on display with the Pride. And quite honestly, it was a failure. I think it's ultimately a failure. I mean, they're going to try to probably continue it into next year. Maybe try to block some of the major sponsors that might have a blow for Pride in Ottawa next year. That's fine. I think it's no big deal if Pride lost a quarter of its budget or 30% of its budget because TD Bank didn't want to put up much money. That, I think, maybe even good for Pride, honestly, to decorporatize a little bit. But a couple of things in the whole Pride, to just see how off to like crazy land these Israel lobby people are on this stuff. So Noah Zatzman, okay, the Green Party enemy Paul guy who sort of was heavily responsible for the disintegration of the Green Party. I had quite a few good little. I was able to really rant. I played I think a fairly significant role in the downward spiral Zatzman with that piece that got really good circulation in the Green Party world. So I had quite a tiff with Noah Zatzman. Amidst some of that, it came out, of course, that Elizabeth May, what did she call me? She said, I forget what she said, but her internal statement about in her email to Zatzman, where she called me, I don't know if she called me a piece of shit, but something pretty close to that. So Zatzman, who's gay, he posts, he says, the city of Ottawa and police should probably withdraw permitting for an anti-Semitic parade that now has nothing to do with Pride and puts the Jewish community at risk. Okay, so we're talking about a statement that clearly condemns anti-Semitism. It's an innocuous statement in support of Palestinian rights and talks about greenwashing or pinkwashing. Read the statement. There's nothing in the vicinity of radical about the statement. Noah Zatzman is now saying Pride Parade is nothing but an anti-Semitic event that they should basically ban. I mean, this is the level of delusion on this stuff is beyond this. Like, how could somebody who he was a political operative with the Liberal Party, he was supposed to be like this successful political operative that the enemy Paul brought in, who apparently was successful so long as he kept the Israel question out of the mix in helping enemy Paul with different stuff early on in her leadership, and then is just totally whack job, like, let's call it like it is, just like a complete crazed nut when it comes to Israel. And he continues to be that, no matter how many people they kill, no matter how many babies' heads are blown off, no matter how many polio cases, no matter how much, got all of Gaza stuck into 11% of an already tiny territory, like there's nothing that will stop this person from making it all about like him, Israel, Jewish. I don't even know like how you discombobulate all of that. It's just totally, completely bananas. Amidst this, so Paul Hutchison, who I believe is he's the Israel consular in Montreal, or he might be the Israeli ambassador. No, I think he's the Israel consular in Montreal. So there's this thing in this discussion, this Liberal Party activist who I guess is gay. In his Twitter feed, he says something about he's sort of basically criticizing because the Liberal Party pulls out of Pride, and he's saying something about it. And there's somebody who posts this thing saying, when everyone hates gays again, this will be why. Okay, so somebody just saying like, because the Pride in Ottawa has put out a statement, a very lukewarm or like a moderate statement about the Holocaust in Gaza, this is then going to be the justification for homophobia. This is a person stating this. And the Israel consular likes this, and this guy pushes back on this statement, this homophobic statement, and the Israel consular says, to be fair, you ask for criticism when you stoop to threatening others. And all this guy who was tied in the Liberal Party said is, I'm going to keep note of the liberals who don't participate in Pride, which is like, obviously, I mean, if it's an important political issue to you and the Liberal Party is refusing to participate, like obviously that's it's called democracy. You pay attention to what politicians do or don't do, and that might inform if you donate or you vote or you campaign or whatever for it's not a and so the Israeli consular is saying this is like a threat that this person is making. But why in the world is the Israeli diplomatic apparatus in Canada getting right in the middle of Pride, Ottawa kind of thing? This is the foreign intervention that's just like considered totally acceptable. And then amidst this, Paul Hutchison says, Eve having I don't know what I posted even. Eve having a lousy day, discovers inclusivity includes Jews. Of course, Pride in no way gave even like any way in which didn't include Jews to Pride. They've gone so far from what's actually happened. Anyways, so this is the Israeli consulate, the Jewish Federation of Ottawa, going full on and trying to basically kibosh Pride in Ottawa. It succeeds at one level and it totally fails at another level. It was a huge turnout. It seems like it was very successful, seemed very spirited. From what I saw online, seeing people were very happy. There was a National Post column, which I do think touched on a little bit of a truth. I don't agree with this person's how they frame it, but they're basically I don't know if I have this, Capital Pride's progressive backlash. And the guy's basic point is right wing. He's like the woke crowd kind of person writing this piece. He's like, hey, the cancel mob is being canceled. The cancel mob is being canceled. So he's the person who says that, this sort of this progressive world that's canceling everyone because they don't follow the proper, I don't know what pronouns, kind of whatever, or the proper language. This is what this person is saying, the woke crowd, that they have now been canceled, and Pride has been canceled, and it's basically he's celebrating it, that it's over anti-Semitism. Is how he frames it. And I think there's a fundamental truth in what he's saying. Like 90% of what he's saying is obviously just this. I don't agree with the overarching power relation question and other elements. I mean, I think I agree with very small bits within it, but overarching, no. But there's this truth in that the anti-Semitism card, that is a stick. That is the stick that, to get the Liberal Party, which frames itself as a big, supporter of Pride, to publicly withdraw from participating. It is that anti-Semitism stick that is that tool. It's the alongside the U.S. empire, the powerful Jewish, well-organized Jewish pro-Israel organizations, alongside a a Christian Zionist kind of ethos that does still percolate in Canadian political culture, some degree of settler solidarity, and then so you have all that power structure that's already in favor of Israel, and then you have that the progressive kind of stick, this sort of pseudo progressive stick of claiming racism, of claiming anti-Semitism, and so I think he is right in a certain. There's a sort of a truth to what he's saying about how that is the stick that can get, as he puts it, the woke mob or the cancel mob to be canceled. Anyways, but the other part to all this is I might have mentioned this last week. I posted about on Twitter about a week ago. Is that you have the whole like anti-racist, anti-fascist kind of milieu, the liberal world like that, who just completely stays quiet on all this, right? They want nothing to do with this. They go on and on about like these marginal white supremacist groups attacking drag, and this is like we're on the cusp of fascism because of these attacks, these anti-queer attacks and stuff like that. They're really into that. That's a really big thing if it's these marginal white supremacist groups. But because it's the Jewish Federation of Ottawa that is the one that spurs this huge attack against Pride, far, far bigger than any of these marginal white supremacist groups have done in terms of attacking, Pride or LGBTQ, activism or movements. They just stay silent, right? They don't want nothing to do with it because and so that's part of why the anti-Semitism stick sort of works. Now I've gone on too long, as too often I do now. Day of action I want to talk about. So on September 5th, there's a day of action. I mentioned last week we've got a number of cities that have already committed, 7 or 8, at CRA, Canada Revenue Agents offices, to bring home this message of genocide is not charity, to pick up on the successes of the Jewish National Fund, the Neiman Foundation having their charitable status revoked. So if people can plug into that, Just Peace Advocates is the principal organizer. I'm helping Karen with some of that as well. And please do plug in different cities. There'll be more city-specific detail coming out, but we hope to organize a number of things surrounding that as well. Very good piece in Mondoise from Miles Howe inside the Neiman Foundation, the Israeli military and settler funder that had its charity status stripped in Canada. And he just goes to this organization. We're talking raising millions and millions, I think $7 million recently. This is a lot of money being transferred, and these organizations are supporting all kinds of totally vile organizations in Israel. Extreme. The groups, blocking aid into Gaza. Really, the fascist organizations in Israel. Please do check out the September 5th, which is International Day of Charity, day of action at CRA offices, and organize one in your community if you can, if there's not one already going on. And just a final thing, there's a good video that some students at McGill did where they confront the president of the university on his bringing in the cops and his anti-Palestinian stuff. And they have a walkout planned on Friday. So I didn't even know school actually started. I guess maybe it's the first day of school, second day of school. I thought it started after Labor Day. They already have a walkout planned, 1 p.m. if you're here in Montreal, apparently. At the demo on Sunday, I got a leaflet given about plans for preparing for a student strike around Gaza sometime this semester. I think seems like it's kind of early organizing phases, but that would be a good escalation in some of what's been going on. So the Palestine campaigning still considered a couple demonstrations here in Montreal, about 500 people on Sunday. I didn't go on Saturday, but it was a big football competition, Copa Palestina at a park happening, big picnic, Palestine picnic, the exact same time. There must have been dozens of people, probably hundreds of people there for that. and the big demonstration. So if people have any comments or questions, I'll make Laura a co-host. Laura, you should.
Oh, okay, you finally, okay, great. Sorry, I couldn't unmute. I can now. Yeah, I have a question for you. I was wondering about with respect to all of the Ukrainians who've come, I guess, I don't know if it's an actual refugee status or something, but since the start of the war that have been allowed to come into Canada under this program where they can stay for 3 years, but they're supposed to find work. I don't know if you're familiar with it. My sister has one of these people staying with her, and she has not succeeded in getting work so far, probably for a host of reasons. But I was asking my sister, and she didn't know. Well, I don't get it. Like, what happens at the end of 3 years when all these Ukrainians have been brought in and they don't get work, if they don't find work like this woman? So then what happens? You're muted, Eve.
I don't know. That's
Oh.
I don't know.
Oh,
If
okay.
anyone else knows, I don't know what the follow-up is. I thought people were I thought people were Ukrainians were all on like sort of clear-cut citizenship track. I didn't know that they needed to have they needed to, you know, have work within 3 years, or the details that you were just stating. But if anyone else knows, please add.
Yeah, I don't know if it's everyone. It's just there's a program where Canadians take people into their homes, and I don't know. My sister said they have 3 years. Okay, so the other question I have is the movement that was that has gotten on whatever, I can't remember names, like banned in Canada or losing its charitable status. So are they working on getting a whole lot of, I mean, is it expanding to other organizations doing the same thing? Because I feel like, well, okay, it's going to be kind of like with the arms ban. So then there's just this other way they get the money the same way by diverting it to other organizations in Canada, or maybe they'll just ship it all to organizations in the US. They're, you know.
Well, that's yeah. So there right now there's about a dozen different registered charities that have annual revenue of over $100 million, that there have been formal complaints, like legalistic complaints, submitted to the Canada Revenue Agency to investigate them, and the complaints basically detail how they're violating CRA rules, supporting West Bank settlement, supporting racist organizations, supporting the Israeli military, and then also dubious financial practices. So the point of the mobilization on September 5th, International Day of Charity, is to basically amp up the pressure on the CRA Charities Directorate to investigate these ones that are outstanding. We know there are dozens more that are violating the rules. I mean, the head of the JNF told the Canadian Jewish News 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago, whatever, that he said there are dozens of Canadian organizations operating in the West Bank. So those, you know, that would all violate CRA rules. So that's the point. Now, there is the piece that Miles Howe published in the Mondowi. So what Miles Howe is doing, part of what he's doing in documenting the whole Israel-focused charity world, is he's come up with this, him and this the other academic Silvestri, I think his name, that they call a burner charity. And so they're showing that they have these different registered charities that basically are dormant. And then when one charity gets its charitable status removed, the funding moves over to this other charity. And so one of the ones that we put in a complaint on, Jewish Foundation Canada, I forget the exact name. They in 2018 they raised no money, and in 2022 they raised 83 or 87 million. That doesn't make it, you know, like that's not how it works. And they don't have basically any staff. They don't have a website. But you're raising
plus million. Like that's because this other organization, Beth Olith, lost its charitable status. It was similar dynamic. It basically raised a couple $100,000, and then in a couple years blows up to like over 60 million. And so there's many layers to what's going on here with these charities and what's the operating. Miles, I don't know. I'm just taking from what he's published. He's saying there's like 15%, the numbers in there, 10 or 15, maybe it's 20%, something in that kind of range of the 270 million. And now 270 million is a low ball number, in my opinion. 270 million annually going to Israel through these subsidized charities. He says, but I think it was 10 or 20%, 10 or 20% is just completely illicit. Like it's just, like tax shenanigans and basically people donating and then getting tax receipts and then basically, using the money for their own purposes or whatever. Right? It's just totally illicit kind of stuff. Not necessarily, illicit in this, not necessarily anti-Palestinian, let's call it that. So what he's pointing out is you got to start taking this much more seriously, because if you can just have burner charities, one charity gets taken out, then they move the money to the next charity, then it gets taken out, whatever. So the CRA has to start taking the issue more broadly seriously. And I think that's happening. We know it's happening. We know even before these two revocations, at least a year ago, Karen was getting echoes from how the different Israel-focused charities were changing their reporting and stuff like that. That basically, when we started submitting these complaints, going back a couple of years ago, and started doing quite a bit of education work on it, writing about it, webinars, etc. That probably what was happening is the CRA was starting to push the charities, hey, tell us more, what's going on, and we sort of seeing changes in their practices. So that was back a year ago. I think we're going to see a number of other charities lose their charitable status, Israel charities, soon. I think it's going to flow. It flows naturally out of what's already happened. It just makes sense. I also think a couple other points on this whole charity question make it important. One question is just, okay, so in this interview in the Canadian Jewish News about the JNF, about 2 weeks ago, radio interview, podcast, the Mark Bloomberg, he runs this called Charity Intelligence, Charity, something like that. He's almost certainly he's Jewish, and it's not totally clear that he's like an aggressive Zionist in this interview, but he seems like he's sort of a soft Zionist at minimum. And he frames early in the interview his big concern about rising anti-Semitism. So takes on the basic talking points of sort of Zionist kind of lobbying in Canada. So in this interview, two things that are, I thought, quite fascinating that he mentions. One, he says that there are 1,000 Jewish charities in Canada that have assets of $12 billion. 1,000 Jewish charities, assets of $12 billion. That is incredible. Now, most of those groups, I would say, I'd venture to guess half of them don't have much to do with Israel. Israel's pretty tangential. A lot of them still have, they're sort of pro-Israel in one sense, but most of them have pretty little to do with Israel. But I would venture to guess that half of them have Israel quite substantial, right? And of course, those who are raising funds for projects in Israel, which we know is 200 plus groups, maybe even higher. That when we hear the 1,000 number, it may be higher than 200. That was what the minimum number we know. But then there's all these schools that are like, inducing kids to go, and there's all these different projects that are sort of pro-Israel. And the $12 billion number is also like, that's a massive number. So that puts the 270, there's other reasons why the $270 million is an undercount, in my opinion. But the $12 billion in assets thing makes that 270 million annual, further confirms that it's an undercount, in my opinion. But the other thing he points out in this interview that totally stunned me, because I've been talking, but when I started on this with the JNF 14 years ago, around the time when the Canada Israel book came out, I started looking at issue. I thought that like 25%, that was a number I was saying, 25% of the money of these groups was like public money. They were like tax write-offs. So with time, I've come to realize, in fact, it's higher, and that in fact, we started talking about 40%, a third, and we started talking about third, maybe 40%, and even 50%, talking about that, maybe it's as high as 50%. But in this interview, Mark Bloomberg, who would know this stuff far, far better than I, because this is part of what he does as his job, he says that he says to the interviewer, he says, you or I, if we donate to these groups, we get 50 cents on the dollar in a tax deduction. But he's like, but rich people, they're getting 80 to 90 cents in provincial and federal tax deductions. So when the Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz give $200 million to the Hessig Foundation, which they've done basically the past 17 years, so just under 200 million, for non-Israelis to join the Israeli military, they may be getting 90% of that paid by the public. I mean, it's incredible. When I thought it was 25%, it was scandalous. And then, 30, 40, 50, and he's saying that they, at the top end, they have these tax shenanigans. And I've looked into a little bit. Apparently, there's one thing, is this thing called the flow through share, which I'd heard about. It's this thing in the mining industry. I'd heard about, like, Alain Deneau in his book about why Canada's a big mining powerhouse and all this stuff. He talks about this flow through share. But apparently this flow through share has this whole, it's basically a subsidy to the mining industry, but then it also has this dynamic that helps charities. I don't understand how that works out, but it does. and so apparently, like, rich Canadians, what they're doing, they're buying these, purchasing these flow through shares, and they're getting sort of this double taxation benefit, one sort of from the mining side, and then one from the charity side, and apparently get them up to 80 or 90% of their donations being covered. To think that, like, $170 million in public funds essentially have gone over the past 17 years to the Hessigs, getting New Yorkers and Montrealers and Londoners and Parisians to join the Israeli military. That's unbelievable, right? And so anyways, this is getting into the details of this whole charity milieu. This is an element. And so this is, okay, and then actually go one step, I've gone on too long on this issue, but we'll go one step further. I'm doing a piece about this right now, and I'm basically arguing the case. And I think it's pretty real evidence here. So much of the Canada-Israel relationship is criminal, right? Selling weapons to Israel is clearly a violation of Canada's Export-Import Act, violation of Canada's responsibility to the International Arms Trade Treaty. It's now even violation of the ICJ rulings. It's totally criminal. It's totally criminal. There's no, like, the language is straightforward about if arms could be used for human rights violations. But global affairs is so politicized that you can't get them. I mean, they've nominally now brought in this sort of embargo, which they barely follow, whatever. But basically, it's so politicized that you can't get them to uphold the law. The same thing goes with the whole, the Canadians, involved in killing Palestinians. They should be prosecuted under the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act. But Minister of Justice won't act. RCMP won't act. Same thing with the inducement to the Israeli military. They won't act. Then you go into the whole question of the wines question and the proper labeling of wines, and then the intervention to block that. I mean, if you go through this, there's so much of the relationship to Israel that violates current Canadian law. But we've had quite limited success. I mean, I think the arms things had some success. All of the campaign and all these fronts are totally worthwhile campaigning. I'm totally supportive. I've been involved in, I've written about, I've participated in demos, I'm not in any way saying that's not good campaigning. It's great campaigning. But what we seem to be seeing is the CRA is a bit more of an independent institution. And so there's an argument to be made that when it comes to campaigning against Canada's criminal support for Israel's Holocaust and apartheid, that the CRA is a more fertile terrain in which to devote energy, because it's more likely to get a result. And that result, in my opinion, still is actually the more important in terms of material support. the major subsidy. This is subsidized. This isn't, the arms at least are sales of arms. They're not giving Israel arms, it's sales. So this is a more, this is a substantial in terms of aiding Israel, and it's a more fertile ground to get results in terms of success of campaign. So that's kind of an argument for this September 5th day of action, and an argument for all this work. Again, principally Karen Rodman has been writing up these formal complaints, but others have been involved in it as well. And I think that anyways, it's just an argument for engaging with the September 5th. And I really do genuinely believe we're going to get some more successes. I think that the pro-Israel crowd on the revocations of other charities, we're not going to get all 200 of them. That's going to take a long time. If we got dozens, I think that would be amazing. I think if we get a couple more, that would, what we got already is a clear success. And we saw that in the UK, they're already taking the Canadian revocation of the JNF, and there's a legal group that's brought that to the Attorney General in the UK, and they're parlaying the win we got to push on the JNF there, and hopefully that will parlay all across the world. But in the Canadian issue, on the Canadian level, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But there's I think there's a certain degree of wins that are possible that we should push on it. Sorry for going on too long. I don't know any other questions.
I think
Josh,
there is.
absolutely.
Nadia has a question. Go ahead, Nadia. And that, by the way, that's a beautiful outfit you're wearing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Eve, for a good presentation as usual. I'm just wondering, first of all, I'm really, really scared because I write for Le Devoir, and I tweet, and I write publicly, and I'm afraid, you never know, this this government of ours, which calls itself democratic, can one day, revert and do what was done during the McCarthy era, round people up and put them in prison. My first question is, aren't you scared? And my second question is, what did you do that prompted, what's her name of the Green Party to call you names? What did you do?
I'm not scared. I don't think you should be scared. I think we actually have lots of freedom. That could reverse. I think if you look at it in the big picture of like an honest assessment of the big picture of the horrors that our government is complicit in Gaza, for instance, even thinking of quite negative, like you saw what happened with Medhurst, the British, the journalist. He's is Richard Medhurst, I believe. He got detained under the 2000 terrorism legislation in the UK when I don't know where he came back from. I don't know where he was, but he when he landed in Heathrow, I guess, or something. And he was detained. It's total outrage. They kept him for 24 hours. I'm sure it was traumatic. I don't want to use that word too strongly. Unpleasant, very unpleasant, scary, but that's quite a far ways down what's likely to happen to any of us who are on this call, even if we're very active and very high profile. So I wouldn't be too worried about that, though it is always a possibility. What did I do with Elizabeth May? Well, I've written about Elizabeth May. I'll try to get up the article that Elizabeth May. It was basically an internal email was made public from Elizabeth May to Zatzman, where she is trying to convince Zatzman to basically cool off from his craziness after I wrote this piece criticizing him. And so she's trying to basically throw a sop to him. And so she says something like, I'll
I'll try to find it. My computer's really slow right now. But I've written many pieces about Elizabeth May on Palestine. You know, in 2016, let's not forget what Elizabeth May did. One of the more incredible, I mean, really, one of the most insane political developments, honestly, in decades of Canadian political history. They had a convention in Ottawa. I think it's every 2 years they plan their conventions. Maybe it's every 3. It's, you know, pretty good period. It's almost certainly not every year. They had a convention. The convention passed a resolution that was like not a sort of modest support for BDS, not support for BDS, a kind of partial BDS thing. And she forced a whole new convention to deal with the one resolution 6 or 7 months later. I mean, literally, she lost at the vote at the convention, and she forced a special convention to be held. The convention was held in Ottawa, and another one was held in Calgary, to just basically deal with one resolution. And I wrote a whole bunch about this, and you know, we did a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, that's where I got to know Dimitri Lascaris. He was at the convention. He pushed the initial resolution, and he crossed the country trying to get, when there was a special convention being organized, to you know, rally Green Party forces to back the resolution that was going to be, you know, brought back to the special convention. And I participated in a couple of those events because it overlapped with my book when I was out in Alberta. I wrote a bunch about in the lead up to the convention, because they also had a resolution on the Jewish National Fund. That's actually where the anti-Jewish National Fund movement really got some mainstream. It was a denunciation, but it got mainstream. There was a resolution specifically devoted to JNF. And I wrote a series of articles in the lead up to it, trying to, like, you know, build momentum on the resolution, on the JNF thing. And Elizabeth May, part of what happened was Elizabeth May she worked to sabotage the JNF resolution on day one of the convention. And so basically she used up her political capital. And so people were so disgusted by what she'd done in sabotaging, because all these resolutions had already been endorsed by the vast majority of members before the convention in an online forum. And so she uses her political capital up in trying to bust up the JNF resolution. And then the next day, the partial BDS resolution came forward. And by that point, everyone was so angry. Usually it would just follow the leader, right? It just follow whatever Elizabeth wants. But people were so angry at what she'd done on the JNF that they wouldn't listen to her on the BDS. And so then the BDS resolution got passed. And then she, like, basically denounced it. She joined. Anyway, so it was like outrageous. So I wrote about her there. I wrote a few further pieces. I wrote about her, you know, she went to a JNF thing in 2013 when we protested when I was in Ottawa. We had a rally outside, a pretty good sized rally, even towards 100 people. She went to it, and afterwards she told the Jewish Tribune, I believe it was, that the JNF helped make the desert bloom, right? Like total, like, outrageous Zionist mythological kind of stuff. And I've written a couple of pieces where I basically say, you know, whether she was a Christian Zionist, and there's real evidence on that. I had a bit of a tip.
Yeah, she's very she's a believer. No, she's a believer. Yeah.
Yeah, she was going to be a minister before.
Yes.
Seminary school, or whatever. So I can't remember exactly what it was that like angered Elizabeth May, and I mean, you know, so there's a whole bunch. I've written lots of things. When I did my launch of the Ugly Canadian, Stephen Harper's foreign policy back in 2011, was that 2011, 2012? She showed up to the launch in Victoria, so she you know, she was okay with criticizing Harper, and that, you know, she wanted to, like, be at the event, wanted to, like, make sure everyone in the audience knew she was there as part of her sort of politicking in the Victoria area. But yeah, I mean, Elizabeth May, I don't know, I don't like, you know, she's unfortunately she's better than 90% of the MPs in the House of Commons, but
Eve, can I ask you?
I have another question.
Okay, go ahead.
Eve, why don't you use your forum? There are about 100 people here every time you have a get together. why don't you ask us to write to our different representatives in government and associations and so on, a letter, a handwritten letter by the post goes a long way. So why don't you ask us to write about a few of the issues you bring up?
The simple answer would be that's a lot of work to organize. But the other part to that would be, and I'm like, that would be great if someone's got the time and energy to do that. That would be great to get that going. But we do that with the CFPI and Just Peace Advocates and the action letters. They take quite a while to formulate often, right? Like they're really important. They sometimes they're quite clearly have quite a bit of success in some narrow issues like the Selena Robinson, the BC NDP. I think we really concretely helped get her, have her resign or get pushed out. There's some things where we can have some, I think the campaigning on Fred Hahn and the QP National, that those kind of things really do matter. They can have some political effect. Big picture of like, changing government policy at a national level, I think a little bit less so. That's much tougher nut to crack. But yeah, it's there are a lot of work, and to do one of those every week would be quite.
Just mention it. Just mention this week we're going to write to so and so. That just a 1 or 2 sentences,
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I'll think about it, but yeah, it's already it's a decent amount of work to keep to organize this each week and to put out the email and to compile all the information over the week and stuff like that. And so I'm hesitant to take on more kind of things. But I got Joshua coming in this room.
okay. All right, so I think the questions are all done. The one thing just Lisa Barrett wanted to know if you have a link to that Bloomberg article on the charitable status thing. If you do, maybe next week you could share it with us.
The JNF interview?
The interview with Bloomberg on the charitable status
If
issue.
you go to the Canadian Jewish News website, they only Joshua, come on. They only do there's only a few podcasts, so it's probably like the second or third or fourth podcast down. If you go to the podcast section of the Canadian News website, and it's Mark Bloomberg, and it's on the JNF. I forget the title of the podcast, but it's not very difficult. If you go to CJN, it's pretty easy to find.
All right, we'll let you get back to Josh then. Thanks very much, Eve. Bye. Hi, Josh. Oh, hey, that's not Josh. Bye.